How many years have passed, and the paint on the focuses is still rather weak. The most critical location is traditional, the junction of the wing and the bumper, which, with its fidgeting, helps the coating to fade. After much thought, in 2015 Ford still had to launch a service event. Bald patches are tinted and covered with a transparent protective film. And, better late than never, the focuses of the previous, second generation were also happy with this at the same time. All the same walking rear bumper, by the way, wipes the paint over time both on itself and on the edges at the corners of the trunk lid. Fortunately, almost everywhere, except for the roof, at the Focus, the body metal is galvanized. Yes, an 8 in general, in the third generation Focus is much more resistant to corrosion than its grandfather. The bodies of even the earliest, 8-year-old specimens, with an accident-free past, are still holding up well. But where the paintwork remains, it loses its luster in a branded way, rubbing from washes and carefully keeping reminders of dates with stones and branches. And the insides of the door handles of the keyless versions were not ready for winter meetings with salt water. The system fails due to a sensor that has fallen into a stupor. In the spring of 2015, dealers were ordered to arrange a sauna day for the dismantled locks and treat the parts, and, just in case, the outer surface of the antenna, with a special Sonax waterproof sealant. They dislike the cold and heated glass, €500. They crack from temperature changes. If the electric heat stops showing signs of life, the first thing to do is to take an interest in the condition of the wiring with the terminals. Since 2017, dealers have been replacing the grounding section of the roof on the chassis in an organized manner. From many lakes of condensate in the headlights of pre-styling copies, Ford engineers brushed aside until 2014. Then, nevertheless, they gave up, instructing the dealers to treat the head optics with an unsuccessful hood using a drill. The hulls were modernized by making 3 holes and installing special ventilation hoses. In addition, the headlights of early specimens older than 2015 decided to blink mysteriously with diode cilia of daytime running lights. It turned out to be the firmware of the HCM unit, which was then corrected, and the sufferers were re-uploaded for service. And also keep in mind that the VSM does not favor contingency xenon. It can even refuse to leave. Do you know what a dangerous saboteur in pre-styling cars can be? A windshield washer pump. Its inconspicuous leak sends fluid through the wires of the harness straight to the main body electrical GEM module in the cabin. At best, this leads to corrosion of the connectors, at worst, to damage to the unit, and in any case, to unpredictable electrical glitches. In 2013, a well-made pump with a normal seal solved the problem, and under warranty at the same time changed the affected wiring harness and connectors. In 2015, restyling brought with it a new capillary attack. This time atmospheric dampness, creeping along the wiring harness of the engine compartment, began to spoil the life of the electrics of the fog lights, horn, or front parking assistance system. The failed line connector was quickly replaced with an upgraded one. But the engine ECU remained at risk. The block is poorly located behind the left front fender liner and runs the risk of not only dying suddenly even in a minor accident, but also corroding with connectors for a long time during overly zealous washes or damage to the locker. The fuse box is also vulnerably attached below the glove box. Passengers, especially with large feet, sometimes inadvertently arrange a blackout, touching and breaking the switching connector. And dampness is easy to penetrate into the trunk. The sealing of the cabin ventilation valve, which perched on the side of the rear panel of the body, does not hold the border on the lock. Since 2013, flood-affected dealers have been replacing the unit with a modified one. But water is innocent in the waywardness of the lock of the trunk drive of sedans. For the lid after 5 or 7 years refuses to lock, or, conversely, sometimes opens on the go, at the suggestion of Ford engineers. And for the next, already the third generation of the Focus, they managed to pile a harness tied to the trunk lid loop with wires that break over time. If the wiring is intact, the reason for the sabotage lies in the electric lock itself. After 4 to 6 years of service, it is equally unreliable, regardless of body type. Even in the electrics, a big joker is a rain sensor. Either the downpour will be ignored, or in the sun it will give the command to the wipers to turn on. And power windows are often weird, working in automatic mode every other time. And just like the predecessor of the second generation, mirror heating often fails. And the heater motor after 50 to 70,000 kilometers can familiarly begin to squeal with worn bearings. A temporary cure with grease is not worth the trouble of extracting the assembly from the bowels of the front panel. Unlike foreign engines, the vast majority, 80%, of Russian Focuses have the last of the Mohicans of the atmospheric Zetec family, which was born back in the mid-90s with the help of the Japanese company Yamaha. And first of all, these Duratec units, studied up and down on previous generations of Focuses, summed up refinement to the requirements of Euro 5. Very young motors, sometimes with a mileage of less than 10,000 kilometers, the 105 horsepower version turned out to be especially vulnerable, began to mope, reluctantly starting up and idling unsteadily. The engine control program was written so poorly that, synchronously with the drop in traction, the soot in the combustion chambers grew faster than snowdrifts in a snowfall. A completely redesigned software with more successful calibrations appeared by the end of 2011 and should be service registered in all powertrain control modules, PCM. By the way, dealers have tried to clean the combustion chambers with relative success by pouring Chevron detergent into the gas tank. In addition to all pre-styling copies with Duratec, a pig can be attached to the wiring of the MAP, manifold absolute pressure sensor, Due to electrical interference, the composition of the mixture begins to float well. In addition to the inadequate behavior of the motor, the blinking of the engine management system warning lamp, MIL, reports what is happening. On this occasion, since 2015, a modified repair harness has been installed as part of the service campaign. It is most important for owners of the most powerful 125 horsepower Focuses 1.6 to remember about the catalysts that are overly sensitive to fuel quality in pre-styling cars. There are two of them at once. Even with good gasoline, they often run out of steam after 110 to 130,000 kilometers and are equally gentle regardless of the year of manufacture. But for instances older than 2014, the sensor wiring behind the converter is laid in such a way that it is often destroyed by the adjacent thermal shield. Keep in mind that in addition to the sensor that has fallen asleep, a fuse blown from a short circuit in the wiring will also de-energize the cooling system fan. And the thermal comfort of the motors is already at risk. Not only is the radiator located immediately behind the grille quickly overgrown with dirt, it is advisable to arrange water procedures at least once every couple of years, but in addition, the heat exchanger turned out to be too frail. The current ones were often changed under warranty. And take care of the bottom of the bumper lip. It is enough to touch the curb once noticeably, and the radiator cracks. And for instances of 2014, in the very first year or two, they thought of leaking and God knows how unsuccessful pumps penetrated the conveyor. They were massively and free of charge changed to conditioned ones. However, do not skimp on updating the correct cooling system pump when the timing belt is scheduled to be replaced after 120,000 kilometers. It will definitely not reach the next one. In memory of the ancestors, the third Focus inherited a capricious fuel pump. Its filter is quickly clogged with dirty fuel and is replaced exclusively with a pump for 200 to 250 euros. And keep an eye on the oil level, which, especially in pre-reform copies older than 2014, is trying to sneak out in all sorts of ways. After 80 to 120,000 kilometers, not only the valve cover gasket is often snotty, but also the crankshaft rear oil seal. And the most literally fleeting scenario is if the phase shifter control valve located on top of the valve cover on the exhaust shaft and the jet under pressure are leaking. Beating outside, very quickly drain the engine. The 2-liter Focus engine older than 2014, 17% of cars, is also an old chain friend. It is based on the quite successful Duratec 2.0. It is also a Mazda MZR LF unit, only on the third Focus equipped with direct injection. High-pressure fuel pumps that sometimes wear out before 100,000 kilometers make you choose gas stations more carefully than before. In addition, high-pressure fuel pumps happen to flow, diluting the oil in the engine crankcase with gasoline, not without consequences. Injectors have become much more sensitive to fuel quality. Clogged, they can deplete the mixture after 30 to 50,000 kilometers. Well, the plates of the intake valves began to try hard to try on a fur coat from deposits. And after 100 to 120,000 kilometers, the engine often begins to vibrate no worse than a diesel engine, which invariably affects the well-being of the already not very powerful right support of the power unit. Usually it has to be updated every 50 to 60,000 kilometers. After restyling, the 2-liter aspirated was replaced by a 1.5-liter EcoBoost turbo unit of equal power, 2% of cars. Obtained in 2014 from version 1.6. Originally made for China in 2010, and also known to us from Volvo S40 and S60 cars. by reducing the piston stroke from 81.4 to 76.4 millimeters. In terms of its tendency to clog nozzles and the formation of soot on the valves, this engine is very similar to its 2-liter predecessor. Thankfully, he doesn't suffer from tremors. And unlike the parent 1.6, his pistons are less likely to collapse. Although there are individual cases, there is still no epidemic. In a small fraction of diesel modifications that have reached us from Europe and settled in slushy areas with the Econetic package in the spring, keep an eye on the condition of the radiator shutter drives. They are overgrown with dirt and turn sour in the closed position, interfering with cooling. But in general, the diesel engines available on our pre-styling versions have not gained popularity, a ridiculous 1% of cars. And in vain, the units of the PSA group, well known from Citroën cars, are quite good. Uncertain start of a cold engine and unstable operation before warming up will tell about dissatisfaction with the fuel of clogged nozzles. Dealers coped with the trouble by adding a detergent additive to the tank. If you do not fill up with the surrogate, the injection pump and nozzles can withstand at least 150,000 kilometers. And the turbocharger is able not to buzz for longer than 200,000 kilometers. It's premature shirk from work on the conscience of the position sensor of the mechanism for changing the performance of the turbine with an oxidized connector. And perhaps short urban dashes at low speeds after 70 to 80,000 kilometers can undermine the health of the exhaust gas recirculation valve. With the engine hanging in the open position, it can even stall, and subsequently, after 100,000 kilometers, the FAP particulate filter. Keep an eye only on the fuel line that was unsuccessfully laid by Ford engineers, leading to the external filter. Sometimes it frays against the handbrake cable passing nearby. After realizing the oversight in 2014, dealers were ordered to install an additional rubber retainer. And the plastic housing of the heated filter itself sometimes melts due to poor contact in a poorly sealed connector. There were covers with it. Changed under warranty, and more than once. The classic 6-speed automatic 6F35, which comes only with the EcoBoost 1.5 engine, is a joint development of Ford and GM, and nothing more than the closest relative of the 6T30/6T40 box, sadly known from Chevrolet Cruze cars. But a different fate. Firstly, Ford took its time and launched its version of the box a couple of years later, when the GM unit had already caught most of the avalanche of childhood sores and even managed to heal some. And secondly, the Ford automatic transmission is distinguished by both electrics and calmer settings, which has a beneficial effect on her well-being. The unit is also scrupulous about the oil level and does not favor large loads in a cold state. In the same way, it is better to change the fluid at least every 45,000 kilometers, but unlike the gym box, mileage of more than 200,000 kilometers is not a record for a Ford One. But the fate of the GetRag 6DCT250 pre-selected with 2 dry clutches paired with 1.6 and 2.0-liter gasoline engines, 54% of cars, at first was not particularly cloudless. The gear unit, which appeared a year before the third Focus, is problem-free. But he quickly became famous for his rather weak release bearing, and even more for his twitchy character. The initially damp controller software and the oil leaking after 30 to 50,000 kilometers are to blame. Through an unreliable oil seal, it fell on the clutch discs and they, at best, began to slip, and at worst wedged. At the same time, the leak accelerates the death of the forks, which in turn increases the wear of the clutch discs. Since 2012, the robot control program has been updated almost annually. For cars with 2-liter engines, 5 of its new versions have been released, with 1.6 engines, as many as 7. The input shaft oil seal was modified, and in the clutch assembly itself, in addition to the friction material, the release bearing and both forks were changed. And in 2013, dealers organizedly changed the ECU for modified ones. The former ones too often had failures due to the loss of contacts in the board. All in all, Ford stepped on the same reputational rake as Volkswagen did with its DSG DQ200. The problems were recognized, the box was finalized over time, and restyled Focuses come to the service with complaints about it much less often. But the sediment remained, and cars with 6DCT250 are still not worth holding in place for a long time with 8 drive brakes. The clutch does not fully open. Local overheating and warping are possible. The 6-speed GetRag 6DCT450 wet clutch pre-selection for diesel versions also brings to mind Volkswagen DSG boxes. But already others, also wet, Series DQ250 and DQ500. For in terms of reliability, It is also similar to a good traditional automatic. The main thing is to maintain the health of the mechatronic hydraulic control unit and solenoids, updating the oil in the general circuit after 45,000 kilometers. And what about purebred mechanics? As before, the least problematic Duratec 1.6 engine is paired with an ancient and not the most successful 5-speed I-85 developed by the French company Bordeaux Transmission. She has long been famous for the hasty wear of drive seals, bringing habit failures to the third-generation Focus. By a mysterious coincidence, the seal of the right axle shaft is especially willing to miss the oil. Even sadder if the cause of the loss of oil is a crack in the box body. And do not ignore the howl of the input shaft bearing, sometimes heard after 100 to 120,000 kilometers. It can jam. The German 5-speed MTX 75 of the Cologne company GFT will be stronger for 2-liter and diesel cars, although you need to monitor the condition of the seals in this box. Most of all, the seal of the gearshift rod likes to snot, and even a minimal shortage of gear oil does not hesitate to affect the well-being of the shafts and gears. After 50 to 60,000 kilometers, the release bearing combined with the clutch slave cylinder may get tired. Difficulties in changing gears after 140 to 180,000 kilometers are a reason to check the condition and adjustment of the shift mechanism. And the clutch is quite durable for both 5 steps and rarely needs to be replaced before 120 to 150,000 kilometers. Power steering aid on the Focus remained only in addition to the 1.6 engine. Trouble with him before. In order for the pump, 350 euros original and 100 analogs, to live longer than 100 to 120,000 kilometers, it is worth changing not only the working fluid every 60 to 80,000, but also a tank with the filter inside, 25 euros. But if the power steering gets lazy in the cold, don't rush to the store for a new pump on the move. It happens that due to condensate in stale oil, the gentle bypass valve simply froze. The hydraulic steering rack itself is not on the list of consumables and, as a rule, lasts at least 150 to 170,000 kilometers. So if a knock appears after 100 to 120,000 kilometers, first take a look at the plastic adjusting bolt plug. Its thread can give slack, and the plug is squeezed out by the support fork from seat 8 of the crankcase. The steering mechanism with the Euro on other versions from a young age decided to rumble on bumps with Caprolon bushings. However, this does not threaten fatal consequences for a long time. Worse, if the EPS, electric power steering, system itself bucks and refuses to participate. In young individuals, this happened due to the fault of the software. A reboot helped. Retraining and resetting memory can also cure deviationism. In instances older than 5 years old, the list of reasons can be replenished with purely electrical ones: burnt tracks on the control unit boards, motor winding, or melted wires due to poor contact. But if a weakly protected drive unit swallows water, the pulley bearings will come to haunt quickly. The main nutcrackers in the suspension are the bearings of the upper supports of the front struts. At first, complaints about a crunch when turning the steering wheel appeared after only 10 to 15,000 kilometers. Dealers sometimes had to change the bearings under warranty in the third round. In 2014, engineers made an upgraded unit with slightly better protection against dirt and moisture. The supports began to hold on longer, but not so much that Ford avoided another upgrade and replacement service campaign in 2017, including restyled copies. Regardless of the material of the front levers, the ball joint after 100 to 140,000 kilometers is officially prescribed to be changed exclusively assembled with them. Although for steel levers there are non-original ball joints instead of riveted ones, it is still better to renew the levers as a whole, and more reliable, and wear of silent blocks can be avoided. Following, after 120 to 160,000 kilometers, the silent blocks of the rear multi-link also fall into decline in an organized manner. Complete revision with repair of longitudinal rods and replacement of transverse ones will cost 350 euros for branded parts or 200 for analogs. But the rear shock absorbers by that time, as a rule, have time to update twice already. And if you regularly and properly check the load capacity of the trunk, then 3 times. The front shock absorbers, for 85 to 110 euros, are original and from 55 eminent analogs, last longer, up to 80 to 100,000 kilometers. Surprisingly hardy racks, branded ones for 20 euros each and from 6 substitutes, and penny stabilizer bushings sometimes nurse out no less. The creaking of the ladder in frost is not a sign of a malfunction. But the front wheel bearings with the same resource, and there is nothing special to praise, only if, Unlike those on the second generation Focus, they are available separately from the hub.